And this is John Reed. I'm rejoined by Vinnie Mirchandani for part 2 of our session. We're going to talk about robotics, a topic that both you and I are passionate about, but you hold the trump card because you actually did enough research.
You had to use that name, huh?
What's that? Robotics?
No, trump card.
Oh, Trump. Oh, I'm sorry about that. Yeah. Trump has become this word, I used to use it a lot, and now
well, it's kind of appropriate for my book.
Yeah.
So.
So ever since I've known you, you've had a strategy of deep primary research on topics around corporate innovation, but this time you shifted gears. Tell us about the book.
Actually, it's not. So the name of the book is Silicon Collar, which, if I were to elevator pitch, would be we are known as white collar workers or blue collar workers or UPS as a brown collar. My point is, all that is passé. We are all silicon collar workers because technology, machines, robots, drones are affecting our work much more dramatically than ever before. Okay? So let's quit pretending we're white collar, blue collar. We're all silicon collar workers. Right. Now, the book turns out I meant to write an innovation book, kind of in the new polymaths theme. So I interviewed 50 different executives, everything from the Golden State Warriors and how technology is helping players and coaches become, next generation metrics, to BP and how they're using robotic crawlers to go down rigs so people don't have to dangle down ropes, how they're using drones to monitor pipelines in remote areas in Alaska and so on, to KPMG and how the public accounting profession is evolving with big data and forensics and other technologies, to hospital, Benioff's Children's Hospital in San Francisco. I talked to the chief medical information officer about how robotic tugs are delivering supplies and how robotic surgeries are happening and how transcription has gotten all with voice recognition improving, has become less labor intensive and so on. So all that is the innovation part. What kept hitting me as I was doing my research is a hell of a lot of pessimism around machines taking over our jobs, right? Dystopian future, machines are killing jobs.
I resemble that remark, Vinny.
Well, John, you and I, much as we are popular, don't have the impact that an Oxford University does, an MIT does,
no,
a Gardner does, and McKinsey does. So many big brands have been beating the drumbeat of 20 million jobs are going to be lost, 100 million jobs are going to be lost.
You can get a lot of eyeballs with that headline.
It's irresponsible, though. When you when you have that brand, you better have. With that power comes responsibility, right? And unfortunately, too many of them have been pessimistic, not necessarily negative for the sake of being negative, but they're pessimistic, and so it's having a chilling effect down to the common man, right? And so the pessimism is, and the politicians are taking advantage of that pessimism. So it is, I had to do a lot of research to offset that pessimism by looking at 100 years of automation. So this is not the innovation part. I actually turned historian and I had to go back and look at 4 or 5 sectors. So I looked at the grocery industry, for example. The UPC code was patented in 1952. Didn't get commercialized till 1974. And it didn't kill jobs. It actually increased them because UPC codes allowed companies, Procter & Gamble, to come out with many different variants of their products, Kellogg's to come out with 100 different cereals, actually increased grocery jobs. Machines have been taken over since 1958 when Chrysler introduced cruise control, right? We're on that journey. So my point is, automation, as technologists, we think it has impact right away because we're used to seeing Moore's law, dramatic impact. The way society absorbs automation is much, much slower. It takes decades. So I'm not as pessimistic. I'm pragmatic, where we're afraid of all these technologies impacting the workplace. It's happening. It's going to happen much slower than on surface it appears.
So. Just to clarify for listeners, don't go out on Amazon today and look for the book because it's not there yet. It might be
September.
Yeah, so in September. In the meantime, if you go to dealarchitect.com, you can sign up for newsletters, get updates. So I'm sure Vinny will also be blogging on the themes. You've already shared some of the content on your blog. So is the book then sort of a combination of a historical look at automation and then what you've learned in various industries about where we're headed from here? Or?
There's actually three themes. So the two you just mentioned. One is how machines are making us smarter, speedier, safer, right? All my interviews with the Golden State Warriors and BP and KPMG, and I interviewed 50 different executives, winemaking, advertising, very broad look at the labor economy, right? Second part of the book is to offset this pessimism. There's a lot of historical analysis of automation in groceries, in automobiles, in accounting, in the U.S. Postal Service. Everything that we thought would be dead by now. I mean, the U.S. Postal Service still supports 600,000 workers, right? And then I did a third part of the book because my research kept showing me the labor economy is actually pretty screwed up, very screwed up. You can't blame machines. How did it get so screwed up where we have, young, digitally savvy workers, and we have 50% unemployment in Spain, not using their young workers? Or in the U.S., we've burdened our young workers with $1.5 trillion in debt. Or look at our aging workers, they don't have enough to retire on. Or look at our talent management challenges that corporations have. So I've looked at all the trends in the labor economy as a third theme in the book because I said, you can't blame machines for that. It's man-made problems.
Right.
And since I'm touching on jobs, I better present that dysfunctional labor economy also.
So you don't think that the increased capacity of machines to not, like you said, not just perform blue-collar functions, but cognitive functions, you don't think that's going to be like seismically disruptive?
It's not because, look at artificial intelligence in its different manifestations. So we had Turing tests. You probably heard of the Turing test, right? When a machine is, you can't tell the difference between whether it's a machine or a human being, then it'll pass the Turing test. That was defined in 1950. Every 5 years we get excited. IBM Deep Blue beat Gary Kasparov, and so surely the machine can now pass the Turing test. It didn't. Then we had Jeopardy, right? Now people are saying Amazon Echo machine learning can beat the Turing test.
Right.
70 years later, we're still not there, right? So as technologists, we get all excited about these things. We hype it up, and the reality is the adoption. First of all, they're not ready to be implemented. When they're ready to be implemented, the adoption curves are much slower than we like to
So you
believe.
don't think like in 20 years we're going to have mostly driverless cars on the road?
I don't. And let me explain. Since you picked on driverless cars.
Rip from the headlines.
Well, there are three elements to driverless cars that the book covers, right? There's technology of driverless cars, which has been evolving very nicely, but it's been evolving since 1958. Cruise control was introduced in 1958. LiDAR was introduced in 1992. Assistive cruise control has been available since 1999. DARPA had its driverless car challenge in 2004. It's been evolving nicely. And Google and Tesla and others have accelerated that in the last 2-3 years. Okay, but that's only part of the solution. Our road infrastructure has not inched forward, hardly at all. Our laws have not evolved forward, right?
Right.
And then we keep forgetting incumbent interests are not exactly going to roll over. And the biggest incumbent interest in automobiles is the driver. We love to drive. I mean, Mazda has a whole concept called Zoom Zoom. Mazda is not investing in driverless cars. Their view is human beings will always want to drive. Now, we're not very good drivers. We shouldn't be allowed to drive. But we forget that there are incumbent interests. Auto insurance isn't going to exactly roll over. I mean, cities that get a lot of speeding revenue are threatened with no revenue from driverless cars because they should run at the speed limit. They have no interest in exactly pushing driverless cars, right? Parking lots will be threatened by driverless cars because you don't need to park something for 8 hours, right?
Yeah.
So all these incumbent interests aren't exactly going to just say, oh, wonderful, let's move to driverless cars, right? But so if you look at the three elements, technology is evolving nicely. Infrastructure is not evolving hardly at all. And let me explain that. Delphi is a tier one supplier to the automobile industry. Just like the Google car, they've had a Delphi car going around the country using driverless technology. They've come back and reported that every state, and we are very uniform as a country, every state has slightly different lane markings. So we need to move to a consistent lane marking. We'll have to invest in new traffic lights that can deal with driverless cars. We'll need new construction workers with sensors to deal with driverless cars. We need new optics to be able to communicate with this. All this is going to be needed when cities and counties are going to have shrinking fine revenue, right?
Right.
We haven't thought through all that. So I don't think it's going to happen for a long, long time. Now, there are some scenarios where it'll happen. So in Europe, they're looking at what's called truck platooning. So there's a driven car at the head of a train. The following cars are driverless. And so there's advantages to that because you can have compressed spacing, right? The driverless car should be able to, rather than 6 feet needed, maybe able to manage with a shorter distance. However, even in Europe, guess what the law is saying? It won't be implemented until 2020, and then the following trucks will need a human being with their hand on the wheel.
Right.
So it's not going to kill the jobs. It's going to allow for a more junior driver maybe to be in the following cars. So that's one scenario which is likely. In some planned cities or disciplined cities, I could see it happening. I can see it happening in certain isolated highway areas. So gradually, this will happen. The big challenge is anytime you'll have a hybrid, driven cars and driverless cars, we're going to have chaos for a while. So I don't see it. I don't see it in 2 years. We'll all be having Uber with driverless cars.
Right. But don't you think that our educational system is completely out of whack with the types of skills? I mean, I interact with a lot of younger people today, and I feel like a lot of them are not at all thinking about the kind of skills they're going to need to remain employed in a world where machines can so easily handle surprisingly sophisticated tasks. I don't think they get that that's even happening.
Well, and you're right. But that generation is the most digitally savvy, right? They've grown up with iPads, and they've grown up with Sonos in the home, and they've grown up with Bluetooth in the car and so on. They will adapt to new technologies far better than you and I did. Okay, so I'm not as worried about that generation adapting to that. We need to give them opportunities. I mean, unfortunately, we have this negative attitude towards millennials. They have a bad attitude and so on, and they do in some ways, but they're no worse than any other previous generation was, right? So I think it's more of a man-made issue versus that generation isn't ready to be.
Well, and see, that would be my concern, because I know you kind of rail on the pessimists. I get concerned about the optimists who fall into, in my mind, lazy, dangerous thinking that as long as we innovate, jobs are sort of a byproduct of that innovation.
No, I don't subscribe to that at all. Okay, I'm not saying I'm gonna create 200 million new jobs. I'm saying the estimates of 200 million jobs being lost are overstated. Yeah. Now, having said that, as a policy issue, if you look at the National Academy of Engineers, 10 years ago they put out what's called grand challenges.
Yeah.
In energy, in healthcare, in infrastructure, et cetera, and we haven't made any progress in those 10 years. Deep space, there are new frontiers that we haven't even explored. Aren't those going to create new jobs?
Right. But don't we have somewhat of an obligation to try to create that future as opposed to just hoping that a handful of lab techs are going to figure this out?
Absolutely. And who is not thinking about that? The academics may not be, but I can tell you a number of entrepreneurs are thinking about that.
Entrepreneurs are, I'll give you that. Yeah.
And, what some of the pessimists don't think about is what I call the unintended consequences, right? So if you were to ask the sporting industry, what are the most impactful technologies that have influenced your industry? Or if you talk to the housing industry and say, what's the most impactful technology? Sporting world would probably say, nighttime broadcast, nighttime lighting is probably the most impactful, right? Housing will say, all the new Zigbee stuff and so on is pretty influential, right? None of them give credit to the lawnmower. Think about it. Without the lawnmower, we would not have stadiums. It would not have led to irrigation innovations. It would not have led to AstroTurf. Would not have led to a whole bunch of other stuff. There are so many examples of ripple effects of humble innovations that mankind kind of moves forward. Okay,
right.
So I just think people are very linear in their thinking. When it comes to this pessimism.
So when we see a headline like our friend and colleague Phil First over at HFS that says automation's impact India's services industry workforce is shrink 480,000 by 2021, a decline of 14%.
Well, I mean, 14%. Look, I'm not naive to say that we don't have some shrinkage in different industries, right?
Yeah.
In my book, I talk about what's called 3D jobs: dull, dirty, dangerous jobs. As a society, we want to be automated. Okay.
Right.
So the Indian industry is a little too labor intensive.
See you, Ray.
And
sorry, we're getting interrupted by Ray Wang of all people. All right.
So the Indian industry is very labor intensive. They should be thinking about automating quite a few of the efficiencies.
Sure.
In SAP Nation, I talked about how inefficient a lot of the outsourcing world is.
Right.
Now, if you look at Phil's estimate, 14% over the next 10 years, I don't have a problem with that. Shrinkage should not bother us.
Right.
It's not part of normal evolution of every industry.
So I wrote a blog about the day the robots took my job, and it wasn't really a job. I volunteered shooting local city council meetings sometimes for my local TV company, and I serve on the board there. And I walked in one day and they said, well, we've got remote controlled cameras now. We don't need you anymore. And it was a little bit of a disorienting, scary feeling, I have to say, and I wonder.
But John, that was a task that piece of machinery took over. Did it take over your entire job?
No. But the point being, like, I could easily imagine how someone in that circumstance could lose their entire job over something like that. And
so let me give you an example from my neighborhood. Right?
Yeah.
So we used to have garbage trucks. It's in the book, where there was a driver and there was a guy who was to dangle at the back, and every house.
Dangler, yeah, I remember the
dangler.
Yeah.
Every house, the guy at the back would step out, pick up the garbage, and dump it in the back of the truck. To me, that's a dull, dirty, dangerous job. I don't feel bad that went away. They were having a tough time getting people to fill that job, right? And guess what else has happened? Forget the automation part. We have moved to a truck that has a robotic arm.
Yeah.
Our bins have gotten standardized. They're 95-gallon bins now.
Right.
The neighborhoods are much tidier. Our recycle rates have gone up dramatically. Okay, there are other benefits that came out of that the county is not paying as much to, from a sustainability perspective. There were other savings that we got, right? And they can create new jobs to replace that dangler job. Okay, I don't feel bad about losing those jobs.
Right. Certainly dangerous jobs. I don't think you can get a lot of argument.
Dull, dirty, and dangerous. Not just dangerous.
Right, but I think also you look at the predicament of workers, and are you necessarily saying, like, well, they're on their own, or do we need massive programs to reskill some of these folks? Because if you spend 10 years in a so-called dull job like that, where do you go from there?
So John, part of what I looked at in the book when I looked at the labor economy, what really made me feel positive was the assumption is corporations lay off people and they go to the permanently unemployed. I found so many examples of second act, third act, fourth act. Look at Dennis Howlett, right? Look at how he's transitioned from chartered accountant to reporter to now a media entrepreneur, right? You look at Brian Summer. He went from Accenture, a partner, to having his own firm. Look at me, right? We have so many examples of people who transition. Human beings.
Those people are really from
more,
the creative class, though, with deep educational backgrounds. I think it's
when
a little bit.
When you read my book, you will see many examples.
And we might be better off if those guys were still doing other stuff anyway than being a painter. But that's a whole other topic. But
there are so many examples of people who have managed to reorient themselves.
But are you really putting that on all that responsibility on the individual and not on us to try to create opportunities
at a more massive scale?
Part
of where the educational system needs to evolve is.
Right.
It's broken in that they expect people to go through 6-8 years of training.
Right.
Right. When it should be much more 3 months, reorient yourself to a new opportunity. Okay.
Right.
So that is something as a society we need to move towards.
Yeah.
I think we need to move towards portable benefits, where people are not tied to an employer, and when the employer lays them off or decides they're no longer needed, suddenly they lose all their health care and so on. We need some level of safety nets for an economy that is a gig economy where people are working for multiple jobs. Yeah, I think there are a number of societal investments we do need to make. But in the end, it comes back to, I can't defend somebody who sees automation 20 years from now taking their jobs over, who just sit there and go, I'm not going to do anything about it, right? I mean, that's where the personal responsibility comes up. And the good news is we have so many opportunities that if we just keep a positive attitude towards, and by the way, the IRS last year reported our adjusted gross income for the country, all the tax returns you and I filed, $9 trillion. So that's after the adjustments. So it's about $12 trillion for us the pie is pretty big. There are the Bureau of Labor Statistics has 800 named occupations it tracks.
The problem I see is I think a lot of people, even who are comfortable now, don't want to give up on a certain way of life where you really don't think that much about work. You clock in at 9, you clock out at 5, you support your family. You kind of live for the weekends in your family. You provide, you pay your mortgage, and you do that year after year. And I think that way of thinking and living is incompatible with the changes that we're talking about.
It's been incompatible for 20 years.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, the concept of a lifetime employment, a pension.
Right.
If you're still clinging to that, you're delusional, right?
Right.
So much more you have to think about. I'm going to change probably 5 or 6 jobs over the course of my career, and what do I need to do to make that lifestyle work for me?
Right.
John, the good news is I see millions of people are doing that.
Oh yeah.
10% are not. And that's where the discontentment comes up, and where the politicians are really getting, making it sound like that is the mainstream. It's not the mainstream.
Right. Well, and what I want to see is how you fill this gap, because my big beef with corporate employers is I feel like they have really done a disservice by they just don't invest nearly enough in training. And so what's come along is there's a bunch of organizations that are emerging that are starting to fill those gaps. I just recently wrote about Girls Who Code, which makes an attempt to get girls active in computer coding early and then align them through internships with tech companies to help fill this gap where otherwise you're excluding mass bodies of people who are not sort of fit to hire, right? Like companies have spent a lot of time hiring only the narrowest sort of fit.
Sure.
And to me, that's really incompatible with what we're trying to do now.
But so I'm not going to defend corporations too much, but let me just paint a picture of the average corporation, Fortune 500 or S&P 500 corporation, 50 years ago, survived 50 or 60 years. Today, the average life is 20.
Right.
Okay. So they've had to make some radical rethink in terms of how they operate, how they hire people, and so on. Okay. So not defending them. I'm just saying that's the reality.
Right.
The average worker has learned to become just as agile. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average American changes jobs every 6 to 7 years. Or actually, over the career, 6 to 7, right? So you've got two extremes where corporations are seeing a very fluid labor force, and labor is looking at corporations and saying they're not loyal. I better not completely put all my chips in that
Right.
basket here, right? So we do have a mismatch. I mean, there are 6 million jobs that are unfilled, John. I mean, you go to the trucking industry, they have 25,000 jobs at $70,000 that are unfilled.
Right.
And so when somebody whines about, "Hey, I don't have anything to do," and then they'll go, "Well, trucking is such a dangerous job and it's such a lonely job and all that." Yes, it is, but don't complain that there's not much opportunity, right? I mean, U.S. Postal Service, not a great job to many of us, but I sat next to somebody on the train last week. He works for the Postal Service. He says, Vinnie, if I work overtime and I do some supervisory jobs,
Right.
he's making $100,000 a year.
Yeah, he's making more than we are.
What?
Yeah.
The point is, we can sit and whine and say society's not taking care of us. There's so many opportunities, though.
Right. So I'm starting to think that a big part of the solution is the types of programs I'm talking about, because you're pointing that companies have a gig worker mentality and they're worried about overinvesting and people are going to leave. But what you're seeing now is a little more of an effort to bridge the gap. There's some really interesting programs right now for autistic workers, for example. It's the same type of thing. How do you equip those people with enough skills, and companies meet them halfway, right? And provide them with internships and opportunities to grow. And to me, that's a big part of, if you want to talk about the way beyond this, it's got to be partnering with groups. There's another one, I was just looking it up, called Launch Code. They provide paid internships for people who lack credentials. And to me, that's the gap, because if you want to talk about these changes, you have to get across how you're going to reach everyone, not just
But John, don't feel bad for the worker. Also feel bad for, I've interviewed so many corporate executives who go, I can't find the people.
Right.
So there is a definite, that's what I'm talking about, that the dysfunctional labor economy we have.
Yeah, exactly.
6 million jobs are unfilled.
That's fair. Yep.
And yet we're whining about, corporations are bad and they're putting all the money overseas. And not a one-dimensional, issue here. A lot.
Right.
We've all confused the labor economy. Corporations have, regulators have,
right,
workers have, and as parents we have. I mean, I look at parents who encourage kids to go to higher education, and they'll proudly say, it's going to be the first one who goes to graduate school, or I'm so proud she's in an Ivy League school. Seriously? I mean, we need to step back and say, what is the reality? And, what is the kid interested in, good at? We outsource a lot of stuff, and we assume that somebody else is responsible. There's a lot of personal responsibility that's needed in this.
So you see your book as inspirational. I think I see it as a wake-up call. Either way, it's a good thing.
It's partly very optimistic, because the examples of the innovation and happening with machines around us.
But it is a wake-up call, though, isn't it?
That's the first. The second is it's a pragmatic, don't get too pessimistic. And the third is a little bit of guys, we need personal responsibility here. Our labor economy is seriously screwed up. And we can't blame machines for that. It's man-made problems that have led us to that, okay? Yeah. And you can blame corporations, you can blame unions, you can blame... Everybody has screwed up the labor economy.
Right. So as we wrap here, what is your sort of biggest hope for the book? I mean, obviously you want it to be a success, sell a lot of copies, all that, but what would be the best case for you? What would you like to see as a result of publishing the book?
Two things. One is, I think if I can combat some of the pessimism around machines, that would be very nice to have. Mm-hmm. Second thing is, if I can get people to just appreciate what a wonderful labor economy we do have, right? It's a lot of mismatches, but God, it keeps 200 million people, I'm just talking about the U.S., generating 12 trillion in income. The pie is pretty damn big. Let's not critique it to death. Let's keep making it better and improve it. right? So that's my second point is there's a personal responsibility there for us to not listen to the politicians and say, oh, this thing is really screwed up. Let's improve it, tweak it. Some of it's going to take corporate moves. Some of it's going to take regulatory moves. Some of it's going to take personal responsibility, right? So I'm very optimistic about what we have and how we can improve it.
Well, I think, and that's our common ground is the value that we would place on the creative impulse to do something about this in your own way.
But by the way, I do have one thing I hope I do have, and John, this is where we will disagree, because of all the pessimism around automation. A number of countries, especially left-leaning European countries, are actually looking at a concept called universal basic income. Switzerland actually had a referendum last month on it.
Yeah.
Okay. The concept is, since people won't have any income, as a society, we should give them $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year, and not expect anything back in return. I think it's a big mistake. There are other ways to accomplish the same thing. I would rather us take the earned income credit and tell people, you earn so much, we'll supplement it, right? UBI to me is a dangerous concept.
Yeah, and that probably delving into that is a little outside today's scope, but it touches on a very interesting thing, which is that some advocates have said that these robots and machines are going to essentially create a new leisure class of people who only work by choice. And so there's a utopianism around that too, of sort of a creative paradise of pursuing human potential while all the drudgery is handled by machines. So
not anytime soon.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. There's a lot of vexing problems to solve in the meantime, right? Anyway, it's a fascinating
and shame on us if we take that layer of human talent and they don't solve our energy problems and our deep space problems and healthcare problems. Naomi and I will go back and forth quite often. And I'll go, Naomi, the day we don't have any problems to solve, yes, I will relax. But I hope others are like me, which is we have so many problems to solve and we need all kinds of human ingenuity to solve them. So I'm not worried about humans running out of things to solve and having nothing but leisure or losing their jobs completely to robots.
That was Naomi Bloom, by the way, in Full Bloom US on Twitter. And I'm going to give you the last word, Vinny. Thanks for that excellent discussion, and I look forward to reading the book and posting a review and all that stuff.
Well, I'm sure people will beat me up because they'll say I'm not pessimistic enough. I am very optimistic about machines improving our workplaces, making us smarter, speedier, safer, whole bunch of other adjectives that.
Well, I told you before, I'm not a real fan of the pessimism versus optimism distinction. I look at it more like people who are getting off their ass and doing shit about this and people who are not. I don't care what their attitude is as long as they're part of the solution. And you've certainly taken that a lot further than most with the efforts you put into this. So hope it has a great success, and I look forward to checking it out. Thanks, man.
Thank you.